The golden light of the morning sun spilled across the dealership lot, glinting off the polished hoods of cars parked in precise rows. Each vehicle sparkled as though vying for attention, their glossy exteriors catching the eyes of anyone passing by. Inside the sleek, glass-paneled showroom of Reeves Automotive, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Sales staff moved with practiced ease, adjusting their sharp suits and rehearsing their customer-friendly smiles. Every handshake, every nod, was meticulously calibrated for maximum effect. On the surface, it was a picture of professionalism and class, but behind the shine, cracks were beginning to show. Keanu Reeves walked into the lot quietly, his presence unassuming, dressed in a simple flannel shirt, worn jeans, and comfortable sneakers. He looked like any other middle-aged man shopping for a reliable car. His relaxed demeanor and understated appearance ensured that no one spared him more than a passing glance. To the sales team, he was just another potential customer, one of many who might wander through the doors that day. What they didn't know was that this ordinary man wasn't there to buy a car. He owned the entire dealership chain. Reeves Automotive was Keanu's pride and joy, a business he had built from the ground up with the vision of offering people quality cars at fair prices. Over the years, the dealership had grown, expanding into multiple states and earning a reputation for trustworthiness. Yet, as the company grew, so did the distance between Keanu and the day-to-day operations. Recently, troubling whispers had reached him, stories of pushy sales tactics, unfair trade-ins, and deceptive pricing. On paper, everything looked fine, profits were steady, and the customer satisfaction reports seemed glowing. But Keanu knew better. Numbers couldn't always tell the truth. People did. So, he decided to go undercover. No fanfare, no entourage, just him as an ordinary man walking into one of his dealerships to see for himself how his employees treated their customers when they thought no one important was watching. It wasn't about catching people in the act. It was about understanding whether the values he had built his business on were still intact. Keanu strolled through the lot, running his fingers over the hoods of a few cars. He paused every so often, pretending to inspect the vehicles. But his focus was elsewhere. He watched how the employees moved, listened to snippets of their conversations with customers, and observed the interactions that unfolded in the showroom. Years of experience had sharpened his instincts, and he knew how to pick up on the subtle details that others might miss. The nervous glances of a young couple discussing financing, the frustration of a customer waiting too long, the overly polished tone of a salesman delivering a pitch. It didn't take long for him to draw attention. Rick Larson, the dealership's manager, approached with a well-practiced grin that oozed confidence. His tailored suit and glossy shoes gave him an air of authority, but there was something in his demeanor that felt just a little too slick. "Good morning, sir," Rick said, his tone warm yet calculated. "Looking for anything specific today?" Keanu offered a polite smile, slipping into his role with ease. "Morning. I'm just browsing for now. Maybe a used sedan, something dependable but not too fancy." Rick's smile widened as he gestured toward the showroom. "You've come to the right place. Let me show you a few options we have." As Keanu followed Rick, he listened attentively, not to the sales pitch, but to Rick's tone and delivery. It was clear the man was skilled at his job, effortlessly weaving words to make each car seem like the perfect choice. Yet, beneath the surface charm, there was an edge to his approach, a subtle pushiness that Keanu couldn't ignore. Rick wasn't just trying to sell a car. He was trying to seal a deal as quickly as possible, regardless of whether it was truly in the customer's best interest. The showroom buzzed with activity. Customers browsed the cars on display, and employees shuffled between desks and offices. Keanu noticed a young family huddled near a trade-in counter, their expressions a mix of hope and hesitation. Nearby, a couple stood by a sales desk, the husband looking frustrated as he reviewed a financing document. The scene felt familiar, too familiar. Keanu had once envisioned his dealerships as places where people could trust they were being treated fairly, where the stress of buying a car was replaced with genuine care and respect. Now, he wasn't so sure. As they walked through the showroom, Keanu noticed Rick's attention was already drifting, scanning the room for his next target. For Rick, it seemed, Keanu was just another box to check off. That realization solidified something in Keanu's mind. This wasn't just about observing anymore. Change was needed, and it needed to start today. Rick led Keanu to a row of used cars parked just outside the showroom. "These here are some of our most reliable options," Rick said, launching into another polished pitch. But Keanu's focus shifted as he caught a tremor of a voice nearby. Turning slightly, he spotted an elderly couple standing at the trade-in desk, their faces lined with worry. The woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while her husband spoke quietly to a salesman. Keanu subtly angled himself closer, pretending to admire a car while listening to the conversation. "Please," the woman was saying, her voice trembling. "This car belonged to our son. He passed away last year, and we've kept it as long as we could, but we can't afford the repairs anymore." The salesman shrugged, his tone indifferent. "I understand, ma'am, but sentimental value doesn't add to the market price. The best I can do is $2,000. The man squeezed his wife's hand, his jaw tightening. "It's not just a car," he said quietly. "It's all we have left of him." The salesman sighed, clearly impatient. "Look, I get it, but this is business. Take the offer or leave it." Keanu's stomach churned. The coldness of the exchange left him speechless for a moment. This wasn't just about a bad trade-in deal. It was about a lack of empathy, of humanity. Stepping forward, Keanu interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" The salesman turned, clearly annoyed at the intrusion. "Sir, this is a private discussion." Keanu's eyes locked on the couple, his tone softening. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Is this your car?" He gestured toward the older sedan parked just outside. The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "It belonged to our son. He was a firefighter. He passed away in the line of duty." Keanu took a deep breath, emotion tightening in his chest. "It sounds like this car means a lot to you." The man nodded, his voice thick. "It does, but we just can't keep it anymore." Keanu glanced back at Rick, who had been standing silently nearby, his expression unreadable. Turning back to the couple, Keanu said, "Let's step outside and talk." As the three of them moved away from the trade-in desk, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever else he uncovered today, he knew one thing for certain: Reeves Automotive was about to change for good. Keanu met Rick's professional smile with an easygoing nod. "I'm just looking for something dependable," he said, his voice calm and casual. "Maybe a used sedan. Nothing too flashy." Rick's grin broadened as if sensing an easy sale. "You've come to the right place," he said smoothly. "Let me show you a few options we have on the lot." As Rick led him into the showroom, he began his well-rehearsed pitch, pointing out features and rattling off figures with practiced ease. Keanu listened politely, nodding occasionally, but his mind was elsewhere. His sharp eyes darted across the room, observing the bustling activity. He noticed how some employees seemed overly eager, almost predatory, in their approach, while a few customers fidgeted nervously, casting wary glances at the papers in front of them. The trade-in desk, in particular, caught his attention, a place where tension seemed to linger like a cloud. As they passed by, a faint, trembling voice stopped Keanu in his tracks. "Please, isn't there anything more you can do?" The words, filled with quiet desperation, pulled his focus toward an older couple standing at the desk. The man, though tall, stood with the weight of age bowing his shoulders. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he clutched his wife's hand tightly, his grip offering what little strength he could muster. Beside him, the woman's face was lined with worry, her hands trembling as she tried to dab away tears with a tissue. Outside, their car, a meticulously maintained but clearly aging sedan, sat parked, looking like a relic among the gleaming new models surrounding it. Rick, now standing behind the desk, leaned forward, his tone sharp with impatience. "I'm sorry, but that's the best I can offer," he said with a shrug that seemed more dismissive than apologetic. "That car isn't worth much. Honestly, you're lucky I'm offering $2,000. Keanu slowed his pace, feigning interest in a nearby vehicle but angling himself closer to the conversation. His ears tuned in as the elderly woman let out a shaky breath. "This car belonged to our son," she said, her voice so soft it was almost drowned out by the noise of the showroom. "He passed away last year. It's the last piece of him we have left." Keanu felt his chest tighten at her words, the raw grief in her voice cutting through the superficial hum of the dealership. He glanced at Rick, who wore an expression of cool detachment, as though the woman's heartbreak were nothing more than an inconvenient story. "I understand that," Rick replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But sentimental value doesn't affect the market price. I can't give you more than $2,000. And honestly, that's a stretch." The woman's lower lip quivered, and her husband placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've held on to it as long as we could," the man said quietly. "But the repairs, we just can't afford them anymore." Rick sighed dramatically, crossing his arms. "Look, the offer stands. If you want to move forward, we can do the paperwork now. If not," he gestured vaguely toward the exit, as if to say their time was up. Keanu's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a bad deal, it was heartless. The couple wasn't trying to haggle. They were grappling with the emotional weight of saying goodbye to something deeply meaningful. And Rick, he didn't care. Keanu stepped forward, keeping his tone neutral. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "What's going on here?" Rick turned, his expression twisting into mild irritation at the interruption. "Sir, this is a private matter," he said stiffly, clearly hoping to shoo Keanu away. "I'm sorry to intrude," Keanu replied calmly, "but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you trading in your car?" He directed his question to the elderly couple, his tone softening as he addressed them. The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "we don't want to, but we don't have a choice." Keanu took a step closer, his gaze moving between the couple and Rick. "And what's the offer on the table?" Rick stiffened but answered curtly, $2,000. "It's an old car with high mileage. That's more than fair." Keanu tilted his head, his brow furrowing slightly. $2,000? For a car that's clearly been well cared for. He turned to the couple. "May I ask what this car means to you?" The woman hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling but steady. "Our son, he was a firefighter. He loved that car. It was his pride and joy. When we lost him, we couldn't let it go. But now," she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Keanu nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like this car is more than just a vehicle. It's a part of him, a part of your family." The woman nodded, her voice breaking. "It is." Rick rolled his eyes, his impatience barely concealed. "Look, we've all got stories, but at the end of the day, it's just a car. Sentimental value doesn't add to the price." Keanu turned to Rick, his calm demeanor unwavering but his eyes sharp. "Maybe not, but empathy does." Rick blinked, caught off guard by the remark. Before he could respond, Keanu shifted his attention back to the couple. "Would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment? I'd like to talk." The couple exchanged a glance, hesitant but hopeful. "All right," the man said, his voice cautious. As the three of them stepped into the crisp morning air, Keanu felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just about a car or a trade-in. It was about dignity, about doing the right thing when it mattered most. And he knew, deep down, that this was exactly why he had come here today. Rick leaned back in his chair, his expression indifferent. "I get that this is a difficult situation for you, but emotions don't change market value," he said with a dramatic sigh, dismissing their pain as though it were a minor inconvenience. The elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a trembling hand, her face etched with sorrow. Beside her, her husband's jaw tightened as he fought to maintain his composure. "We've done everything we could to keep it," he said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "But we just can't afford to keep repairing it anymore." Rick remained unmoved, shrugging as though their predicament was nothing more than an everyday transaction. "Look," he said bluntly, "my offer of $2,000 is more than fair, considering the car's age and mileage. That's the deal, take it or leave it." From a few feet away, Keanu had been watching and listening. The cold indifference in Rick's voice and the heartbreaking desperation of the couple struck him deeply. His chest tightened, and a wave of quiet anger surged within him. It wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about decency, about respect. He stepped forward, his calm demeanor belying the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice firm yet steady. "Can I ask what's going on here?" Rick turned sharply, his irritation clear on his face. "Sir, this is a private conversation," he snapped, clearly trying to shoo Keanu away. But Keanu didn't even glance at Rick. Instead, he directed his attention to the elderly couple, his warm gaze meeting theirs. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said gently, "but I overheard a little of your conversation. Are you trying to trade in that sedan?" The woman hesitated, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Yes, we are," she said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "And he's offering you $2,000 for it?" He gestured toward Rick without so much as looking at him. "That's correct," Rick interjected sharply, now visibly annoyed. "It's an old car, and $2,000 is a generous offer." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the couple. "I'll offer you $5,000, he said, his tone calm and certain, as though he were stating a simple fact. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, the usual bustle of the showroom faded into stunned silence. The elderly woman gasped audibly, her wide eyes searching Keanu's face for any hint of insincerity. Her husband's brow furrowed in disbelief. Rick, meanwhile, froze. The confident veneer he had so carefully crafted slipped for just a moment, replaced by a flicker of panic. "You can't just," he started. But Keanu's steady gaze cut him off mid-sentence. "I'll pay $5,000 for the car," Keanu repeated, his voice unwavering as he addressed the couple. "But only if we can step outside and talk first." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and her husband nodded slowly, his voice catching as he said, "All right, let's talk." Keanu offered them a reassuring smile and gestured toward the door. "After you," he said softly, following them outside as Rick stood behind the desk, his face red with anger, but his words swallowed by the weight of the moment. Outside, the crisp air felt lighter compared to the tension in the showroom. Keanu turned to the couple, his demeanor shifting to one of quiet empathy. "I'd like to hear your story," he said gently. "Why is this car so important to you?" The husband, Harold, cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "It was our son's car," he began. "He was a firefighter, a real hero. He loved this car and kept it in perfect condition. After he passed," his words faltered, and his wife, Linda, squeezed his hand tightly. "It's all we have left of him," Linda finished, her voice breaking. "But we've been struggling to keep it running. The repairs are too expensive. And with our medical bills," she trailed off, wiping away fresh tears. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand now," he said softly. "This car isn't just a vehicle to you. It's a memory. It's his legacy." The couple nodded, their faces a mixture of grief and gratitude. "But why would you offer us more than it's worth?" Harold asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. Keanu smiled faintly. "Because it's not about what the car is worth on paper. It's about what it means. I'll buy it from you, but I won't sell it. I'll restore it and keep it in his memory." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You would do that?" she whispered. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out his checkbook. "Absolutely," he said. "Some things are more important than money." As Keanu wrote the check, Rick burst through the glass doors of the showroom, his face flushed with frustration. "You can't just," Rick started, his words dripping with indignation. Keanu turned to face him, his expression calm but commanding. "Rick," he said evenly, "we'll talk later. Right now, I'm helping these customers." Rick hesitated, the weight of Keanu's words and demeanor silencing him momentarily. With a resigned glare, he stormed back inside, leaving Keanu to finish his conversation. Keanu handed the check to Harold and Linda, his tone soft. "Take this," he said. "Drive your son's car home with pride." Harold accepted the check with trembling hands, his eyes glistening with tears. "We don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice shaking. "No one's ever done something like this for us." Keanu smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Just know that his legacy is in good hands." As the couple drove away, Keanu stood in the lot, watching them disappear into the distance. He knew this moment wasn't just about one car or one family. It was about setting a standard, about making his dealership a place where integrity came first. And as he turned to re-enter the showroom, he felt a renewed determination to make that vision a reality. "Oh, no," the elderly man stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. "We couldn't possibly accept that." Keanu raised a calming hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let's step outside," he said gently. His tone was warm yet firm, giving the couple a sense of reassurance. Once outside, away from the bustling noise of the showroom and the prying eyes of others, the couple opened up. Their words came slowly at first, laced with emotion, but as they spoke, their story unfolded like a delicate thread unraveling. "Our son was a firefighter," the man, Harold, began, his voice heavy with pride and grief. "He gave everything to help others. And this car, it was his pride and joy. After he passed in the line of duty, we just couldn't bear to let it go." His wife, Linda, clutched Harold's hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "We've done everything to keep it running. But with the medical bills and our own health," her voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. "We have no choice but to let it go now. It's breaking our hearts." Keanu listened with quiet intensity, nodding gently as they shared their story. He could feel the weight of their loss, their struggle, and their love for their son. When they finished, he spoke softly, his words thoughtful and measured. "I'll buy the car from you," he said, his tone filled with kindness, "but not to resell it. I'll restore it and keep it in your son's memory. His legacy deserves to live on." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "You'd really do that?" Keanu nodded, pulling out his checkbook with practiced ease. "Some things are more important than money," he said simply, his voice steady. As he began writing the check, the couple stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by his unexpected generosity. Before the check could change hands, the glass doors of the showroom swung open with a loud bang. Rick stormed outside, his face flushed with anger and indignation. "You can't just," he began, his words sharp and clipped. Keanu turned to face him, his expression calm but unyielding. His tone dropped into something quiet yet commanding, the kind of authority that didn't need to shout to be heard. "Rick, we'll discuss this later. For now, I suggest you get back to work." The words landed with the force of a gavel. Rick froze in place, his bravado visibly deflated. There was something in Keanu's demeanor, a quiet power that made it clear this wasn't a man to be trifled with. Though Rick didn't yet understand who Keanu truly was, unease flickered across his face. Harold and Linda exchanged a glance, their relief evident. Keanu turned back to them, offering the check with both hands. "Take this," he said softly. "Drive your son's car home with pride, and know that his memory will be honored." Harold accepted the check with trembling hands, his eyes welling with gratitude. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "No one's ever done something like this for us." Linda, her voice thick with emotion, added, "You've given us more than money. You've given us hope." Keanu smiled warmly, his eyes meeting theirs with sincerity. "It's the least I can do," he replied. "Your son was a hero. His legacy deserves respect." As the couple drove away, Keanu stood in the lot, watching them disappear down the street. His heart felt heavy yet full, knowing he had done the right thing, but his resolve only hardened. This wasn't just about helping one family, it was about setting a higher standard. Keanu walked back into the showroom, his focus sharpened. He spent the rest of the day observing, noting how Rick interacted with customers. Each exchange was a masterclass in manipulation, subtle pressures, exaggerated trade-in values, and promises that sounded too good to be true. Keanu watched as Rick leaned heavily on tactics that prioritized profit over integrity. And worse, he noticed other employees following Rick's lead, likely trained to do so under his management. By the time the sun set, Keanu had seen enough. As the dealership quieted and the last customers filed out, he stood in the center of the showroom, the weight of what he had witnessed settling over him. This wasn't the business he had built. It was a pale shadow of his original vision, and he wasn't going to let it stand. The following morning, Keanu arrived early, a clear purpose in his stride. One by one, he called the staff into the conference room. Rick entered last, his confident smirk firmly in place, oblivious to the reckoning that awaited him. Keanu stood at the head of the table, his demeanor calm but commanding. "I've been watching," he began, his voice steady yet cutting, "and what I've seen in this dealership is unacceptable." Rick shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the first flickers of doubt crossing his face. "With all due respect, sir, I think you're mistaken." Keanu cut him off with a raised hand. "Rick, enough," he said firmly. "I own this dealership, and yesterday, I watched you take advantage of grieving parents. I listened as you dismissed their story, their pain, and their humanity for the sake of a few dollars." The room fell silent, the weight of Keanu's words settling over the staff like a heavy blanket. Rick's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for a response. Keanu turned to the rest of the employees. "This stops today," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength that left no room for argument. "From now on, this dealership will operate with honesty, transparency, and respect. If you can't stand by that, there's the door." No one moved. Keanu's eyes lingered on Rick. "And as for you," he said, his tone unwavering, "you're done here." Rick's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "You can't just fire me," he sputtered. "I've been running this place for years." Keanu met his gaze without flinching. "And that's exactly why it's time for a change." As Rick stormed out, the remaining staff sat in stunned silence. Keanu took a deep breath, then addressed them once more. "We're going to rebuild this dealership the right way," he said, "and it starts now." The room filled with a cautious but undeniable sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, Reeves Automotive felt like it was heading towards something better. Keanu left the meeting knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see it through. This was more than a business, it was a chance to make a real difference. And for Keanu, that was worth everything. In a staff meeting that morning, Keanu Reeves stood at the front of the room, his calm yet commanding presence silencing the murmurs of conversation. Dressed in the same simple attire he had worn while observing the dealership, he scanned the room, his gaze steady and deliberate. Taking a deep breath, he revealed the truth. "My name is Keanu Reeves," he began, his voice firm yet tinged with emotion. "I own this dealership." The room fell into stunned silence. Shock rippled through the employees, their expressions ranging from surprise to unease. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others froze entirely. At the back of the room, Rick's face drained of color. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't," he began, his words stumbling over themselves. Keanu raised a hand, silencing him with a calm but resolute gesture. "I've seen how you run this place, Rick," he said, his tone sharp yet controlled. "The dishonesty, the lack of compassion, it all ends today." Rick opened his mouth again, no doubt preparing some desperate excuse. But Keanu's unyielding gaze stopped him in his tracks. "You're fired," Keanu stated simply, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Collect your things and leave." Rick's face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. He lingered for a moment, perhaps hoping for a reprieve, but none came. With a huff, he stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. The tension in the air was palpable as every employee remained still, unsure of what would come next. Keanu turned back to the team, his expression softening slightly. "This dealership was built on integrity," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "It was meant to be a place where customers could trust they were getting a fair deal. Somewhere along the way, that got lost. But from this moment on, we're going back to those roots." His words resonated, each syllable landing with weight and meaning. "From now on," he continued, "every customer will be treated with respect. Fair deals. No hidden fees. No predatory tactics. If anyone has a problem with that, you're free to leave." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room remained silent, but the energy began to shift. Slowly, a young salesman named Chris stepped forward. His expression was a mixture of gratitude and courage. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he said earnestly. "We've needed this for a long time." Keanu nodded, offering Chris a small, appreciative smile. "It's time to make things right," he replied. In the weeks that followed, Keanu worked tirelessly to implement sweeping changes across the dealership. Policies were rewritten from the ground up, placing transparency and customer satisfaction at the forefront. Employees were retrained, not just on sales techniques, but on the importance of trust and integrity. Those who resisted the changes were encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere, while those who embraced the new direction found themselves reinvigorated by the shift in culture. Keanu's first priority was addressing past wrongs. He directed his team to review records, issue refunds, and offer personal apologies to wrong customers. Keanu even made many calls himself, ensuring sincerity and rebuilding trust. Slowly, the dealership's reputation began to shift. Stories of honest deals, heartfelt apologies, and Keanu's hands-on approach spread, transforming skepticism into renewed faith. One day, Keanu observed a young family chatting with Chris in the showroom, their smiles reflecting the newfound trust in the dealership. Later, Chris excitedly handed Keanu a handwritten review. "I never thought I'd trust this dealership again, but your changes prove good businesses still exist. Thank you for giving us hope." Keanu tucked the note into his pocket, moved by the impact of their efforts. In the months that followed, Reeves Automotive became a symbol of integrity. Employees felt united, customers returned, and new ones arrived, drawn by the dealership's values. Keanu's visible involvement inspired loyalty among staff and patrons alike. By year's end, Reeves Automotive was thriving, not just financially, but as a beacon of fairness and compassion. A heartfelt letter from an elderly couple, thanking Keanu for restoring their late son's car, underscored the deeper impact of his work. As Keanu reflected on the journey, he realized this wasn't just about business. It was about creating a legacy of trust and humanity, one honest deal at a time.